Every time I have to do one of these overrated videos, I get a little scared. People are ruthless in the comments. They don't take even the slightest piece of criticism when it comes to their favorite artist. And considering the fact we're talking about one of the most loved and respected musicians of all time, I think it's reasonable for me to be a little nervous. My name's Luna, and today we have a brand new episode of the Overrated series where we take your favorite artist's album or song and ask the question, are they overrated? Today's actually a really special episode. We're talking about one of my favorites, one of the all-time bigs, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. Much has been said about Elvis Presley. You know, there's books, there's movies, documentaries, but still I think that a lot of people don't really understand the impact that Elvis has had on society, because on the surface level, I think a lot of people can say, hey, I don't think anyone believes Elvis is overrated, so what is the point of this video? But when I went on social media, when I did my research on, you know, the public's opinion on Elvis, a lot of people seem to believe that he was more an icon rather than an actual great musician. A lot of people think that he was a hits guy, you know, a guy that put a bunch of singles out there and they all went #1 and wasn't really focused on album or music on a technical level. A lot of people don't really know that he was actually skilled on, you know, multiple instruments, that he's considered one of the greatest vocal performers of all time. Basically, a lot of people seem to believe that Elvis the celebrity overshadowed Elvis the artist, and I think that's completely wrong, which is the reason why I decided to do this video. As you may or may not know, if you follow this channel, we use 4 different categories to come up with a conclusion. That is popularity, influence, performance, and discography. Now remember that this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments, and I'll make sure to check it out and give you my opinion on your opinion so we can have a small conversation in the comments section. Let's not delay this any further and let's go with the first category, popularity. As you guys know, I am always open to debate. No matter if you're just being mean to me in the comments, no matter if you're just trying to be an idiot, I'm always open to have a conversation with you about music. However, I don't think I would engage with anyone who's willing to argue that Elvis Presley's popularity is overrated. Like, the guy is one of the most popular musicians of all time and actually is often ranked among the most popular human beings overall ever, you know, to ever exist. Based on that, I don't really think we should spend that much time on this category. However, I can explain a few reasons why Elvis was so popular. The main one being obviously his music, the amount of singles he has, songs like Are You Lonesome Tonight, Can't Help Falling in Love, Jailhouse Rock, Suspicious Minds, Burning Love, In the Ghetto. Like, there's so many songs that went #1 and are considered trademarks of American music that it's obvious that someone, you know, the guy that released those songs is going to enjoy a lot of popularity. But there's also a number of things. For example, his movies that he released in the 50s and the 60s. You also have the fact that he served in the military for 2 years, and, you know, back in the day, maybe not today, but back in the day, it was a huge deal for, you know, the American audience. And also the fact that he was so beautiful. It does have a lot to do with your popularity, how aesthetic your face is, and Elvis Presley was a sex icon. He did gain a lot of controversy starting his career, basically adopting rock and roll, which was considered an African-American genre back in the day. Given the fact that we're talking about the 50s, which it was still a very racist America, a lot of people saw Elvis as a threat, you know, to the youth and to their American values that were deeply racist. But also the fact that he had all this hip movement, all these sexual performances, and even though today we may see it as the most normal thing in the world, you know, when you have someone like, I don't know, Doja Cat and Sexy Red and all these other artists exposing themselves like they are doing today, we may see an Elvis performance and say, you know, that's the least sexual thing ever. But back in the day, considering that you had people like Frank Sinatra, Paul Anka as the norm, as what is accepted for males, when you see Elvis rocking his hips like that, it was definitely something different. All of that led to Elvis being one of the most talked about humans in the world from the 50s all the way up to the 70s. And even today, 40+ years after he died, people still talk about Elvis, people still listen to his music, and, you know, he's still packing some incredible numbers. So definitely there's no way in hell that Elvis Presley, in terms of popularity, is overrated. Let's go on with influence. A much more interesting category. As I said before multiple times, I don't really care that much about popularity. Every time I have to talk about it, it's just like to get it out of the way and that's it. However, influence when it comes to Elvis Presley is a super interesting topic, because he did not only influence the music scene but also society overall. As I said before in this video, he was basically the one who adopted rock and roll music to white audiences as well. white people enjoyed rock and roll back in the day, but still segregation was a thing, racism was a thing. So it wasn't so, the praise for rock and roll was kind of like a public secret. Everyone enjoyed it, but no one really admitted it. That's until Elvis Presley came onto the scene with his Rockin' Hips, with the Sun Session, and his two self-titled studio albums released in 1956 with songs like That's Alright, and basically bursted onto the scene with this new style. Obviously, his style of rock and roll is very different from the one, from the one people like Little Richard and Fat Dominoes were doing at the time. Way more quieter and more controlled. Elvis, performance was really energetic too. Basically, that's the essence of rock and roll. Energy, fun, excitement. But Elvis seemed to do it in a more control and relaxing way while still capturing that energy I was talking about earlier. However, Elvis was like a combination of a lot of different genres. He was able to do gospel, folk music, country, Delta blues, rock and roll, and that was not really seen at the time. The norm was, if you play jazz, you play jazz. If you play rock and roll, you play rock and roll. You can't do both. Instead, Elvis basically said, no, I can do whatever I want, and that inspired a lot of people to have more diversity and variety in their music. Not only in their discography as a whole, but, even in one album, he had songs like Blue Moon, That's Alright, and I Love You Just Because. This inspired a lot of people like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elton John, Bruce Springsteen, and even today in modern music, there's a lot of people that say that Elvis Presley was one of their biggest inspirations. People like Post Malone and Shawn Mendes. I know it sounds weird. I don't really think anyone sees Post Malone or Shawn Mendes and think, yeah, there's Elvis in that. But they said it themselves, and I really have no reason not to believe them. It just goes to show how massive and wide Elvis's influence was. He wasn't only someone that brought rock and roll music to white audiences, or to the mainstream, as a lot of people like to call it. That's a massive understatement. His performance style, the fact that he was so, in control all of the time with the track, he was so relaxed. He was not scared to sing in a lower volume, and I'll get more into that in the performance category. But overall, the way that he performed music felt so passionate and so natural that inspired a lot of people to do the same. People that didn't really have the same vocal skill as someone like, again, Frank Sinatra or any of these blues musicians who have a massive control of their voice. While Elvis also had complete control over his voice, he wasn't scared to not show that control. He wasn't scared to show a few performances where he wasn't really trying to be in control all the time. And in my opinion, that led a whole generation of musicians to focus more on the way they express themselves, on the songwriting, on the lyrics, rather than, air control or staying in pitch. For those reasons, 100% no, Elvis is not overrated in terms of influence. He's one of the most influential musicians of all time. He popularized rock and roll and modified it in a way where people were able to branch out of, rock and roll and create sub-genres. He obviously didn't create rock and roll. He said it himself that it was already there when he adopted it. However, he managed to modify rock and roll to make it more radio friendly, to make it more neutral for people to, twist it and play with it and create something different out of it. And for those reasons, I think that he's not overrated in terms of influence. Now let's go with performance. In terms of performance, this is way more interesting because a lot of people seem to believe that Elvis's vocal range was not really that big. And while looking at his discography, I can sort of understand what someone would believe that. I think that you just need to look at his live performances, because Elvis used to sing music that didn't really require him to go that high. If you listen to songs like It's Now or Never, for example, you can tell that his tenor quality voice was excellent, was really good, and he managed to pull out those notes with a lot of volume and power without really feeling forced or difficult. And when it comes to high notes, you have a lot of songs in his early discography, especially when those rock and roll cuts were really raw and just natural. You can see him reaching some really impressive notes on there. And the fact that he was so in control all the time when it comes to his performance is remarkable. I think that a lot of people mistake having a wide vocal range for vocal ability. Your vocal range depends more on a lot of things that come naturally with your body. A lot of people just have the ability to raise their voice higher than others, and that just comes in the way their throat is structured. You know, you can't really do anything if your vocal range is not really that high. Skill, the actual vocal technique, comes from having full control of your own voice, you know, your chest voice, your mixed voice, and your head voice. And Elvis was a master at this. You know, in songs like Love Me or I Love You Because, he was able to go from the lowest part of the song to the highest with relative ease. You know, it was almost effortless, and that takes skill. You know, go ahead and try to sing this song. It's not really that simple. You get a lot of voice cracks because it requires you to change where your air goes in a fast, precise way that not a lot of people are able to do. Obviously, if you compare him to people like Paul McCartney, to people like Freddie Mercury, for example, Adam Lambert, or all of these different artists who have a massive vocal range, McCartney with his octaves, and, you know, Freddie Mercury with those high notes he reaches in songs like Don't Stop Me Now or Bohemian Rhapsody, I don't think Elvis could sing any of those songs. That's clear. But comparing him to the #1 vocalist of all time, it isn't really a good way to determine if an artist is overrated or not in terms of performance. In my opinion, I would very much rather, and I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but it's just my opinion, guys, understand that please, that I would rather listening to an Elvis Presley song rather than a Freddie Mercury song, because in my opinion, when it comes to the theatrical nature of a Queen song, obviously it fits Freddie's voice way more. But when Freddie tried to do more pop style singing, obviously with a few exceptions like Radio Gaga and Crazy Little Thing Called Love, and, you know, some other songs he did in the 80s with Queen and in his solo discography too, I think that sometimes it feels out of place, like he should be singing rock music. Instead, I feel like Elvis's tone of voice was way more versatile. It could be adapted to a lot of different genres, which is why I said earlier in the video he was able to go from gospel to blues to folk music to country to rock and roll. He was able to adapt to a lot of different genres, and every single thing he tried, it seemed like he spent years singing this music. You know, he was naturally talented to know what to do, how to perform, and in which tone to perform a song. And in my opinion, that makes him a great performer. And if you want to talk about vocal technique, you know, vocal skill, range, you know, vibratos, and, you know, air control, you can go to his Las Vegas performances, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna be amazed, like truly amazed, when you see how powerful and intense his voice was, but also how tender and loving it could be. So yeah, definitely not overrated in terms of performance. Even though a lot of people think he's the greatest of all time, no, he's not the greatest performer of all time, but he definitely should be ranked among the greatest. Now let's go with discography, which, as I say in every single one of these videos, is the most important category in this video. If you win this category, you win. You win. You're not overrated at all. Even if people think you're overrated in terms of performance, even if people think that you didn't influence a single soul, even if people believe that your popularity wasn't that big of a deal, if you have a good discography, in my opinion, you win. You're a great artist. You deserve all the praise you get. So when it comes to Elvis, what do we have? Do we have a good discography? Do we have a bloated discography? Well, it's kind of both, because Elvis released 24 studio albums from 1956 to 1977. That's 21 years, which means he released at least one album per year. However, even though it's a lot of material, you know, Elvis's discography can be a little hard to tackle. You don't really know where to start, because the most common thing would be to start at the beginning and then go all the way up. But that's not really a good way to listen to his discography, because you're gonna find a lot of gospel, a lot of recycled material that no one really cares about, a lot of, you know, remakes of certain songs he already recorded just 6 or 7 years prior to this new recording. Like, Elvis's discography is really messy, and honestly, from a management point of view, maybe it sold a lot, maybe it gave, you know, Elvis and the discography and, you know, his manager a lot of money, but from a listener's point of view, it is really not the best way to listen to a discography. It's just too much material, takes away a little bit of the credibility his discography has. However, I must say that every single one of these albums is relatively enjoyable. You can find a lot of good tracks in any of these records. You know, I don't really want to go in detail about every single one of the albums because, again, there's 24, and there's the 4 volumes of the Golden Records, which are kind of like, you know, compilation albums. But in those compilations, you can find songs that you can't find in the studio recordings. So I think it would be good for you to listen to those albums too. Some of them are really good, especially Volume 3 is one of my favorites, actually. However, I do want to point out a few highlights. In my opinion, The Sun Sessions is his best album. I know it's a compilation record, but it was released in 1955, so actually I think this feels more like a studio album rather than his self-titled record released in 1956, Elvis Presley, which is also a highlight. Really similar to The Sun Sessions. However, The Sun Session is a little bit more lengthy, so if you want to listen to a more, you know, cut version of The Sun Sessions, this is your album. You also have Elvis, another self-titled album released again in 1956, way more tender. There's a lot of rock and roll songs in here too, but it feels like this is a little bit more romantic. This is a really good one too, so you definitely give it a try. Then you have From Elvis in Memphis, released in 1968, I believe, and this is a really good album too. Honestly, I would go as far as to say that if you don't want to count the Sound Sessions as, you know, part of his discography, this is the best album by far, one of the most cohesive Elvis albums out there, and you know, the production on this album is really great. His performance is so heartfelt and passionate. Honestly, I just love this album a lot. It's one of my favorites, actually. And then you go to the 70s. Personally, I don't really like this, you know, this time in Elvis's career because, you know, a lot of reused material, a lot of his performance now was a little bit more theatrical, a little bit more fit to Las Vegas, and that kind of took away the relaxing nature of his performance in earlier albums. However, Moody Blue is a good album, and Elvis Presley Now is also a good album from that stage of his career. So you do have a number of great records, and even the ones I'm not talking about, you know, the other 20 albums in his discography and the Golden Records too are decent records. You know, I don't think there's a weak Elvis album, although maybe some of his soundtracks are not that good now that I think about it. I believe that there's a lot of people, especially young people, that don't really know anything about the albums I just mentioned. So in terms of discography, no way that he's overrated. He has some really good albums, and even the albums that are not as good are still decent, still solid, has some solid tracks in them. The discography is just unorganized, and honestly, I don't think that takes away that many points. It does affect his credibility a lot, to the point where I think that Elvis's discography is underrated because there's a lot of people who don't dare to tackle his discography due to how bloated it is. But honestly, if you enjoy Elvis and you enjoy, you know, his art overall, I believe that you should give his discography a chance, starting from the very beginning and going all the way up to the top. I know it can be a little bit taxing on you. It can be 11+ hours of music, but you know, if you give it a try, I'm pretty sure you're not going to regret it. With that being said, I think the conclusion is pretty much obvious. Elvis Presley is not overrated at all. Not that a lot of people think he is, but a lot of people seem to believe that he was just a singles guy, you know, a hit guy. He was just a pretty face. He was just the guy that popularized rock and roll music by having, you know, by jumping on stage and being a sex icon. And I think that just undermines his legacy as an artist so much that I felt the responsibility of making this video. And even if only 5 or 10 people watch this video fully and watch it all the way to the end, I have 45 minutes of recording right now, so this video is going to be pretty lengthy. I think it's still worth it, you know, if only a few go ahead and actually pay attention to his music, his discography, everything he did, how the music world was in the 50s and the 60s, and how much he changed it. I think it's gonna be, you know, my time here and the time that I'm gonna spend editing this video, it's gonna be worth it. So with that being said, 100% no, Elvis Presley is not overrated at all. That'll be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Also, I want to know what you guys think about my opinions on Elvis Presley. Go ahead and leave it down below. Do you think Elvis Presley was overrated? Do you think that he's actually underrated? Well, it's what I believe personally. So go ahead and leave it down below, and I'll make sure to check it out as soon as I can. If you have any requests, if you want me to talk about a certain artist, a certain album, a certain singer, or you know, any music news that are going around right now, like the new Taylor Swift album, go ahead and also leave a comment, and I'll make sure to fulfill your request as soon as I can. With that being said, once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.